Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. Today we've got a special guest, Tom from Crypto Gurus in the UK. How you going, Tom?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been watching some videos on your channel from a long time back. I've always been very impressed with all the content you do, so it's a genuine pleasure to be chatting with you.
Oh, thanks a lot, mate. And you've been researching STOs flat out. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk a bit about what's been happening in Australia, see where the conversation takes us, because I think it's such an interesting debate where ICOs are going, where STOs are going. So
Mhm.
do you want to talk about your journey into crypto for those that haven't followed you?
Yeah, so my journey was, I guess it was the typical way I think most people got involved, which was the investing side. I was an incredibly poor uni student looking for any way of making any money, and I've always been obsessed with investing. I was that sort of weird kid that at 18 opened up an ISA. Sure, I went out with my mates and had some drinks as well, but I loved the investing side. I bought a low cost index fund. I've been obsessed with that for so long. And then my mate told me about this thing called Ether, which went from $50 to $100 in the space of a week. And that was mental. Doubling in value is ludicrous. By the time I looked again, it had doubled to $200. It had quadrupled in the space of 2 weeks. I thought, this is insanity. Where there is smoke, there's usually fire. So let's start investigating. I started reading into it and invested into it myself. Unfortunately, as a uni student, didn't really have a lot to invest. So that was quite painful watching this gigantic bubble form, being a uni student and not being able to commit as much as possible. But I just had that moment where it clicked and I understood it. And I knew that this was going to be huge in the future. And this is what I wanted to do. So ever since I've left uni in I think about 18 months since, I've been working full time in crypto, studying as hard as possible and creating as much content.
It's
How about
funny.
yourself?
It's funny you say that about Ether. I got into Bitcoin in 2012, and you couldn't buy it in Australia back then. So I bought it in 2013, and then a lot of my friends that I was annoying missed the boat. They thought I was crazy, and then Ethereum came along, as you say, and I kept annoying them.
Mhm.
And we bought some at $20 before the Dow, and then it fell and it crashed to like $6, and I'd lost 75% of their money. And I said,
Mhm.
guys, this is still a good thing. Do you want to buy some more at $6? And our target long term was $100. But geez, who could have seen that ICO craze coming and the demand for ETH? And when it went through $1,000, we were just absolutely blown away. And I certainly think that STOs are going to play a role in the demand for ETH and all the standards that are being built out for ETH. So, what's your research telling you about STOs?
To summarize, they're going to be gigantic. They are, in my opinion, everything that's come so far is incredibly powerful, but also so niche. If we look at the crypto markets, what Bitcoin is, what ICOs are, we're talking about take an ICO, you're building out a crypto economic model for a company and applying a utility token. Of the companies that exist in the world, that's probably going to be 0.1% of them, or companies, foundations, networks, whatever you want to call them. It's incredibly niche, as powerful as it is. Security tokens apply to just about every company and anything of value that currently exists in the world. We trade shares in a way which is incredibly inefficient. It goes through these manual processes, and we have to do compliance in a manual way. We can use a security token and we can trade shares far more efficiently. We can trade bonds far more efficiently, derivatives, artwork, cars. Basically, anything of value can be tokenized. And at least I would say 50% of those have genuine use case to be tokenized and have significant advantages. So if I
Yep.
was to summarize it, I can't really put into words how big I think this is.
Yeah, and I've got some slightly different views. So we're going to have a friendly debate today, guys. So a few of the things that I do agree on is that we need to get the bottom few billion people that aren't trading shares, that don't own anything, that only have a few dollars to be able to buy $5 of Apple stock. So I think that sort of fractional ownership and opening up these markets to everyone is really great. And I think everyone's getting a little bit too excited about tokenizing everything. Just because we tokenize something doesn't make it great. We've still got to look for good
Yep,
individual use
absolutely.
cases. And you do, as you say, there's $1 trillion of market. But I also think that cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, what it's doing, that is the biggest market to disrupt banking and the legacy financial system. We're talking, trillions of dollars there as well. And the other thing that I think utility tokens and ICOs can still disrupt, and decentralized finance is becoming a hot topic, is everything else that's built under that sort of financial infrastructure, as well as the Web 3.0. I think we'd have to say that the internet is the biggest industry sector, whatever we want to call it, and the fact that we're having people trying to build decentralized Facebooks, all these other things, giving the power back to the people rather than these top-down organizations that farm our data and have all this power. I think that space is still really big, and everyone's getting very excited about STOs and equity, but I still think there's going to be a huge use case for utility tokens.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I should make it clear that I think there's a huge use case for STOs. And I also kind of foresee a market dynamic where everyone forgets about everything else for a while and just talks about STOs. The same way that everyone I know that Bitcoin got a lot of mainstream coverage, but I found working in the industry, there was so much more attention actually on ICOs. That was where everyone was interested because that's how you could make money. I can see another sort of trend occurring like that, but it doesn't mean that everything else going on isn't incredibly valid and is also disrupting. It just means that if you're not getting 10 times return in 6 months, people aren't going to necessarily pay as much attention in the short term to the other aspects.
Yeah, and that's a really important aspect, the hype. And we saw that in the ICOs because of how easy it was for the everyday Joe to get into what they thought were these good companies early. And it's easy to sign up. Now, that all changes a little bit with STOs. It's a lot of sign up to get onto one of these exchanges. It's very heavy KYC. There's a lot of paperwork for you to prove that you can invest, and a lot of these are only going to be offered to accredited investors. So everything takes time in that world. There's a lot of regulation. There's a few more barriers to entry, and that's why I don't see it garnering the same runaway excitement. That's probably a good thing if we have sustained growth in the STO space. But I think that's one of the reasons that I think it's going to be a bit of a barrier to entry. And as we've seen lately with the initial exchange offerings, there's a lot of hype around it. And now there's been 4 or 5 and people have just consistently missed out, and people go, what, stuff these IEOs, it's only for the rich, it's only for the guys that know someone. And that's kind of how I see this playing out in the STO space. It's already going back to the venture capital world where they're the only guys that get the good deals and get in early. They've already got accounts on a lot of these platforms, and I just think the average man on the street isn't going to get overly excited about this, but I could be wrong.
I disagree for the reason, the first point you mentioned about all the steps, absolutely correct. You do have to go through KYC, AML. There's not going to be any of this anonymous element to it, but I also don't see that being an issue. If you can get an incredible investment into a company and that you really want to put your money towards, 20 minutes of work is something that people are going to do. We're going to have the early people who say, no, I don't want to do it. And then everyone else in the market does it. You eventually end up doing it because you think, well, 20 minutes, this is not worth missing out on an incredible opportunity. Yeah. Now, when you talk about you talk about private investments and venture capital, that's absolutely where this is currently headed. We're currently in a particularly equity, I would say. Companies that are using the STO model to raise money, there is definitely more of a private financing model because public issuance is expensive. You have to go through these. The lawyers are going to charge incredible fees because when you're selling to the public, you have to be far more rigorous with your PPM. You have to go through all these extra steps. Now, the market isn't currently there, so it makes no sense to do public issuance. If you could only raise, let's say, 500,000 and you're paying 200,000 for public issuance, logically, that's no sense whatsoever. You've just thrown away 40% of your capital. But if we have a situation where there is market interest, then those fixed costs could potentially become so low that I see a completely different dynamic occurring. If Bitcoin were to say it could be unrelated or could be related to Bitcoin, but if Bitcoin goes to 20K tomorrow, hypothetically, we're going to see far more greater influx of money in the market. It's going to be far more interest, and people are going to start looking at other things. And I think security tokens, now as Bitcoin increasing in value gives money to security tokens. That's what I mean by that. It could happen without Bitcoin. All I think is when people start seeing potential returns, they start seeing the use case. I think we'll then see the public side come out. I think it's further down the line. Yeah. We have to start with private, but I don't see it going the way that this is just a private financing method, which a lot of people are talking about.
there's some interesting correlations there as well, because we saw Bitcoin drag everything up, and everything's priced in Bitcoin on these altcoin exchanges, and that's when they all tend to run along at the same time. Now, in the equity world, none of these are STOs are trading priced in Bitcoin or pegged to Bitcoin. So I don't think there's going to be the correlation there. And if we think about what they represent, equity in a company, a stake in a gold mine, there's no reason for that to go up in price when Bitcoin does, as we saw with the whole altcoins, because it's kind of speculation about the sector. What is the cryptocurrency industry going to boom in the future? It's all sort of piggybacking off Bitcoin. So I can tend to agree with you that it's going to be very different for these STOs. Yeah.
But let me say this. ICOs also weren't related to Bitcoin. I know that you can draw a parallel maybe, but if you're a company who's trying to launch a decentralized computing network and you have a utility token, you ran an ICO, you're not actually related to Bitcoin at all. You just use the underlying blockchain technology. And yet Bitcoin hit 20K and it was because of ICOs. So I think I agree with you inherently, there's no fundamental value. But I also think that in the early days of technology, people understand this so little that they will say blockchain is STOs, blockchain is Bitcoin, is Ethereum, is everything. And we will still, even though it makes no sense, I still think we are going to kind of see, I think potentially, depending on how quickly STOs take, I think they could be the triggering factor for a Bitcoin bull run. As little sense as that makes, I think that's going to happen.
That's an interesting take. We did a video literally in 2017 saying, hey, I think correlations are going to break because all these different companies are trying to disrupt individual industries. There's no reason why they should be highly correlated to Bitcoin, as you say.
Yeah.
But that complete nonsensical nature of high correlation still continues to this day. So the friction for STOs is we have smarter investors looking at balance sheets, cash flow statements, and pricing these things to perfection. Now, whether or not it's the startups, as you say, that garner all this speculation, because again, it's blockchain. It's the blockchain space is heating up. Just like we saw on the internet, anything.com, anything in that industry started to heat up. So that could be where we have some similarities.
Yeah, and as you say, the underlying thing, you said earlier, the underlying thing defines how good something is. So whether we tokenize shares in a company, it doesn't change anything about the underlying value of the company. But unfortunately, irrational investors, which tend to be part of this market, and if we are in a bull run with a bubble situation, especially then, irrational investors don't make those correlations. And therefore, we see situations which don't logically make sense, but the hype takes us there.
Yeah, another point about hype I just want to touch on is that global nature would not have been possible for these returns to go 100x as they did without something taking off in the US, then Korea, then it's hot in Australia. All the YouTubers are covering it. Now, with the STO space, the offering might only be to accredited only in the US. It might only be available to retail in Australia, and it doesn't have that same global reach yet that's going to prevent it from getting a lot of that, that hockey stick sort of excitement and hype. But as we said, maybe that's healthy for the space. I wanted to ask you... Sorry.
I don't necessarily agree with that, because if you're talking about hockey stick movements, well, the dot-com bubble between 97 and 2001 was a ridiculous hockey shape movement. And we had mostly institutional investors because it was heavily US focused, and it's really they're the only people that can get in pre-IPO. Sure, there was demand post-IPO, but most of it came from institutions just in the US. So if you look at accreditation laws worldwide, they're a lot more relaxed than they are compared to the US. So for me personally, I'm not an accredited investor, but I am a sophisticated investor. That's what it's called in the UK, which means I can take part in these situations. So I see security tokens potentially bringing in a lot of institutional capital because they understand that. Firstly, they understand it. Like, it makes sense to them. It shares in a company. This is not a utility token. It's so logical. And I think they will eventually see the power of it. The ability to be able to bring liquidity is so powerful. So I think we're going to see a situation where we have institutional capital, but also regular people from other countries taking part. So I don't actually know the Australian laws, but people like you and me may be able to take part with the institutions, which would be a big, big change.
It is fairly easy in Australia. So when I was in my younger days, 18, 20, I had taken part in IPOs in Australia. So there's
Mhm.
no sort of real barriers to entry other than your KYC and whatnot. Now, regulation is something that's really interesting. And we had a meeting with the Australian Treasury Department the other day to talk about these frameworks to put around how do we regulate ICOs, a utility token versus a currency, or what's happening in the STO space. So this is so interesting to me. There's probably 10 or so countries that have come out that are going to be really friendly to STOs.
Mhm.
And they're starting to put out a framework for ICOs. And I see, the pendulum swinging back to ICOs once we have sets of standards in place and business plans, treasury management. You can only use the funds once you get to each sort of point. So again, I think we're going to start to see these mixes and not everyone go down the STO path. But what I wanted to ask you was, what sort of STOs excite you most? Is it just the fact that you can own equity and more companies are going to get funded, or is it individual things that you want to see get funded?
Uh, I like the picks and shovels approach.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about an industry being built, I think the vast majority of the value is going to accrue at the infrastructure layer. So issuance, exchanges, they're two of the potential early movers. Unbelievable value if we can potentially pick winners. That's so difficult to do. But in terms of investing, that's obviously where I think is the opportunity. So that's where I'm interested in. I also think the information layer is quite important. It's something that people often overlook. In public markets, they're so efficient because there's so much information out there that you pretty much can't get an edge because there's so much information. When it comes to private markets, they're so unbelievably inefficient in a lot of occasions.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about tokenizing private markets, which means opening them up to other people for the first time ever, we're going to have 100 times the number of investors, maybe. Throwing out a number there, but certainly a vast increased number of investors, which means we need more information. And I think there's very few companies currently focused on providing that. So those
That
really those three areas where I'm particularly interested by.
That's a fascinating point you raise about market efficiency. Look where the market went to get information about ICOs. We had
Mhm.
YouTubers that had no idea what they were talking about, directing people to things like BitConnect. Like, it was the most inefficient system possible. We had ratings websites where
Yep.
you paid them 5 Bitcoin to get 5 stars. It was
Yep.
absolutely atrocious, and we're starting to see the fallout from that now.
Yeah, a good example. I used to talk about token velocity quite a lot because I think it's long term such a big issue. And then after a while, I started saying to people, look, I think there's a problem with token velocity here in this project. I don't think anyone else knows what token velocity is. Therefore, I don't think the market cares. Even though it's a fundamental issue, the market information simply isn't out there for investors. So they didn't factor it in. So it was, as you say, a situation where we need more information out there, more valid information. I think the current sources are
Yeah.
somewhat lacking.
And that token velocity, tokens that are being used in the real world, we're starting to see these projects that have a little bit of life breathed into them versus the projects that are dead and still have no use for their token, that are sort of still bottom bouncing, I guess you'd say. So it's exciting for the people that did do their fundamental research.
Yeah. Now tell me, when it comes to ICOs, you talked about you think potentially ICOs may come again before STOs. Do you see it playing out the same sort of way? Or do you see a more advanced market, a more developed market?
So I don't. I probably see the STO thing happening in the next 12 to 18 months, and then I see the pendulum
Right.
swinging back in the way of ICOs when a few of those headwinds that I described about good projects find that they have to go to VCs, or there's too much regulation, they can't really follow through on their idea. It was just too strict. It wasn't had the open nature, which a lot of this movement was all about the open nature and decentralization in 2016 using Ethereum. So I see the pendulum going swinging back that way. But at that time, there's already a standard being developed called a trusted token offering, where you, as I said before, you have to put up all the information almost like a prospectus without doing a security. And you say, this is what we're going to use our funds for. You're going to have a little bit of a say in governance, and it's all programmed into this token, but it's still an ICO. And I see some of the most successful projects were the decentralized ones. MakerDAO is one of the, if you go on YouTube, we're one of the first people to do fundamental analysis on MakerDAO. It's a fantastic ICO decentralized project, and now it is starting to get the limelight. So they're the sort of use cases that I'm trying to look for. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's certainly very interesting ones out there. There are, I guess my only issue with it is I think that it's sort of the same issue the public has. It's like when they look at blockchain, they say there's so much bullshit here. And when I look at ICOs, I think I think when I speak to people that say there's so much bullshit here, I'm the one saying, yeah, there's 10 times more bullshit than you think. I think it's fundamentally immoral to sell a utility token which has no fundamental value. Because why should you be selling something and putting a fixed value on it when it doesn't have any value? And I think 99% of projects, unfortunately, they haven't really addressed token use and token velocity correctly. I think they just saw a way of not selling equity in their company. Now, if we can switch that and we can build in genuine fundamentals, that would be very interesting.
So just to push back on that point, I think the public ruined it in a lot of ways. Then they brought all the bullshit, and these YouTubers that jumped on, started shilling ICOs, they ruined it because back in 2016 we had Digex, Goldback Token, Golem, the computing network, Maker, all these fantastic projects. And even if you go back further to say, what was Ethereum worth when they raised capital? Nothing. Ether had no utility. So I kind of disagree to say it's unethical. I think it is unethical for 99% of projects that are crap.
Yeah.
But for the good projects that were around before the hype, and when the hype dies down, I'm hoping they will come back. They had that future promise of developing a decentralized platform, Web 3.0, and a lot of the good projects have delivered and built what they said they're going to build. So that's what I get really, I guess, passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you there. When it comes to the 1% of projects, I do look at them and I love them, quite frankly. A project which is able to get rid of equity within its company and essentially have the utility token be the only thing which represents value is an incredible idea. I can't explain, I literally can't explain it to people, but even when I try, it's amazing to put into words. The only issue is that I think there's so few people, companies out there which have actually done that. And I think I have a problem, not a problem. I think I find it tough when we talk about a company that has equity within their company and then they sold a utility token, mostly because they didn't want to sell equity.
Yeah.
And now we have investors who are holding these utility tokens, but don't have any clue that there's also a company underlying it which has equity. And they're thinking, well, my utility token has gone down in value. The company's going to do well. I'm going to be fine. It doesn't mean that. It means that you've got a token and you've got equity within a company. They're entirely unrelated things in far, far too many of these instances.
Yeah, and there was information out there. If you read the white paper and it described how the token was going to be used, if it didn't have a good use case and you still decided to invest in it, you've got to take some responsibility at some stage. Now, if you picked a good token and it's starting to be used, it's increasing in value, that research is still out there. But I wanted to mention a couple of STO examples that I am excited about, and that is things that aren't getting funded or done by government. Now, in Australia, we've got Power Ledger. I'm sure you're familiar with that. One of the things that they're going to start to try and do with an STO model is called asset germination. So if we decide that my home state of Tasmania, we need a wind farm here because power is so expensive, the government are doing a horrible job, private investors can fund a wind farm and we own a fraction of that, and we start to get the revenue. I think that is the sort of thing that I'm super excited about.
Yeah, there's so much power to that as well. Being able to democratize how you raise money. Those words, you can't even explain to people how unbelievably powerful it is to be able to, from a community, raise a set of funds and do it in a low-cost way. And that's what's really key, because this has existed before. A lot of people think security tokens are 100 different things than you.
Yeah.
I think for 100 things that most people think, 90 aren't you. There's just 10. But those 10 make everything else possible. So for the example you give, you could have raised money. You could have done that in the past. But the administrative costs are just crazy. So if you can automate them, as with any piece of technology in history, if we automate it, it might be possible to begin with, but no one's doing it because it's far too expensive.
We're hoping to launch, I'm not sure when this will upload because we're recording now, but We're hoping to launch Australia's first STO platform soon. And the costs, as you say, people put that $1 million figure out there to do an IPO and all the paperwork and whatever. We're hoping to have that well under $100,000 to launch a fully compliant STO in Australia, and an over 90% reduction for the cost for a startup that might only be able to raise $1 million. That is just such a huge deal. So
Yeah, absolutely. And see, once again, that's an example. It does already exist. So the other example, so IPO, as you say, crazy cost comparison, crazy cost saving. But even if you didn't want to go down the public route and you wanted to do a private raise, you could do crowdfunding in a lot of countries. Even the US, they have Reg CF, and you can raise just over $1 million per year in their country. They're the most stringent when it comes to raising money from the public.
Yeah.
But it sucks. You generally have to use one of the official portals, and that's going to give you they're going to take off 5 to 7%. That was the lowest set of fees I saw when I did research. It was 5 to 7%. So if you're raising $1 million, throwing away 50 to 70,000 instantly at the lowest end of the spectrum is madness. We can't be doing that. When it comes to security token issuance, so you actually say 100K, and that is very, very good compared to the traditional system. I see that shifting rapidly, though. I think a lot of this is going to get commoditized because it's just a simple process. It's put something in, goes through a smart contract, it comes out. I think what's really exciting is when we have 100 different issuance platforms all fighting to be the cheapest ones out there, and they're saying to everyone, look, we can do it for 5 to 10K. I don't know if that number will ever be achieved, but if we can get a public raise for 5 to 10K, that is truly, truly game changing.
I agree, and competition will take us there. Any final talking points, Tom? Anything else you want to go over today? Well, I think we've been going for about 40 minutes.
You wanted to mention IEOs? We could cover that if you like.
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit before. I think this space has heated up, and we're about to see all these other top 10 exchanges jump in with their own launch pad. But I got that feedback today that someone said, there's 4 or 5 now. I've missed out on all of them. This is just for someone insider trading, someone that knows someone. So again, interesting to see that if this gets diluted, now that it's not just Binance, there's 10 different platforms, and every night we're going to see a token sale just like we had every night in ICO phase. So do you have any thoughts on IEOs?
To be honest, I think you've explained it very well. I like the concept. I like the idea of not just going to a random website and sending money to a random address. I do like that you go to an exchange and they tend to add some layer of security. What I don't like is the crazy market dynamics it's caused where everyone is just, I don't even know the next Binance Launchpad token or coin, but I know there's going to be excitement for it before I even know the name because it has nothing to do with the name. It's just about Binance Launchpad. But as with everything, I think markets correct themselves, and what's happening right now, we're seeing 10 exchanges realize here's our opportunity. Here's where we make profits in a bear market. They're going to push us back to a normal market dynamic.
Yeah.
And in the end, therefore, it's probably a good thing. We're taking away some of the risk, and we're probably not going to see this craziness that we've seen over the past few weeks forever.
Yeah, and I do like what Binance have done for the space in a lot of ways, but I think if they keep going down this path, they might be digging their own grave. Some of these token sales were selling, I think it was 5-6% of their total supply. Now, when that other 95% pushes the price down in the future with the overhanging supply, people are going to turn around and be like, I didn't sign up for this. Maybe Binance get a bad name, but we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think there's a few people trying to highlight Binance's bad name at the moment already.
Exactly. Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, mate. It's been a great discussion. We'll definitely have to have you back on in the future once this space starts to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate your time. It's been fantastic to hear your thoughts on everything STO and IEO related.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, guys.
Pleasure. See you soon.